What's up, Nick here. I am obsessed with images, probably a lot like you. I love obsessing over how to try to make like the most perfect image that I can make. I love making the perfect frame. But like most of us, I don't really have the time to really invest into doing that with every single shot. So I wanted to challenge myself to try to think of faster ways and more efficient ways that I can implement more often to try to get the best image. And I came up with a list of 3 things that help create a good image. But first, I wanted to talk about what a good image actually is. So that's what we're talking about today. Obviously, there's a lot of technical hurdles that you have to get through in order to create a really good cinematic image, or photograph for that matter. But one thing that I find so important to an image is creating depth. That's the most important thing for me, is having an image with good depth. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that, but the 3 main things that I think are important for creating depth are framing, blocking, and obstruction. And we're gonna go through all 3 of those and exactly what they are and how you can use them in this video. I also have my camera and a few lights set up and ready to go so that we can actually demonstrate how to create depth in your images. So the first thing is framing. Now you can set up a frame however you like, but if you use a few tools with regards to getting better, more cinematic, more deep framing, it's gonna make the image look a bit more cinematic and look like you designed the frame on purpose, because now you are. For me, really the best way and easiest way and fastest way to create a better image through framing is to utilize something like leading lines. And these are lines that are pointing towards a certain perspective in the actual frame. And they're just naturally occurring lines that you'll see in any sort of set. In the hallway, I've just put a chair at the end of the hall, and I'm gonna turn on the camera, press record, and we're gonna develop the scene through there. I'm gonna show you exactly what it looks like with the camera just set up like this, and then I'm gonna lower the camera and get it closer to some leading lines, and we'll see how the perspective of the frame actually changes. Okay, so that's what the scene looks like after the camera's set up. There's no lights turned on. I literally just put the camera on the tripod, pointed it down the hallway at my chair, and that was all I did. And it looks okay. There's nothing really wrong with it, but what we're gonna do is we're gonna lower the camera and move it closer to one of the corners of the hallway to try to increase the depth just by reframing the shot. Okay, so that's what the image looks like after we've done a little bit of reframing. And as you can see, there's a lot more depth to the image. We have objects that are actually closer to the lens that really show the size of the hallway that we're shooting in. And it looks good. I think it looks a lot better than it did before, especially when you look at the before and after. This is what it looked like beforehand, and this is what it looks like now. I think that's a general improvement to the entire thing, but obviously there are ways to make it better. And the second thing that you can do with that is blocking. Something else I'm gonna do is just set up a couple of lights so that we can sort of see the space a little bit better. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that right now. First light in, now I'm gonna get the second one. That's how it works. What? Yeah, so I think that looks pretty good. I think that's decent lighting, at least for the purposes of showing us how to create depth in our imagery. So the second thing that I really want to talk about is blocking. And blocking is basically how your subject or your objects move through the scene in relation to where the camera actually is. In this case, we have our camera locked off on a tripod, so we don't necessarily have to worry about the camera moving, but we will have to worry about how our subjects move. And so right now, as a static, it looks fine, but what we can do is take a subject and move it from something like the foreground to the background, and that's gonna help us create more depth. And it actually literally leads you through the scene. So you look at everything in a specific progression that the person creating that image wants you to look at. So we have this, but then if I walk from the room number 1 into the chair, that actually creates depth because it tells you where to look. So I'm gonna go ahead and do that. So you see, just by me walking through the scene like that, something very simple. It's not very complex, that doesn't require a lot of direction, it certainly doesn't require a lot of time, but it leads the eye through the scene from one point to another. And that creates even more depth. So you pile that on top of framing, and you add that all together, you create even more depth in your scene. The third thing I want to talk about with creating depth is something called obstruction. So in a very basic sense, obstruction is just putting stuff in front of other stuff. It's not terribly complex. It's usually pretty easy to accomplish. For instance, I'm just gonna grab, I don't know, I'll grab my chair and I'll put it in the scene in front of the lens, obstructing the background, but not disrupting the framing of the entire shot. So we'll see that, and that will add more depth to the shot as well. Let's go ahead and do it. So here's my chair. And if I just sort of place it like that, that just adds some more depth to the entire scene. It creates that obstruction of the foreground, kind of making you pay attention to the foreground a little bit, but because it's not the main focus of the image, what it essentially does is show you the major differences between the background, the middle ground, and the foreground. It's called foreground obstruction. That's actually what it's called. You can do rain, you can do leaves falling, you can basically do anything that you want to obstruct the view of what you're trying to focus on. But my favorite thing to use is something called fake atmosphere. And I actually have some right here. Atmosphere aerosol. And essentially what this is just compressed mineral oil. And what it does is create a haze in the air so that you can create your own like atmosphere inside of the scene. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna incorporate this into the scene. We have our foreground obstruction, we have our framing, we have our lighting, and we have our blocking. So what we're gonna do is add this on top of all of that, and we're gonna create a scene with a lot of depth. It's really important to, It's really important to try to even out the haze inside of your scene. So just take a piece of cardboard and just kind of waft the smoke around as much as you can. Okay, so we're not dealing with a particularly big hallway, but what I did was I added a bunch of haze to the hallway so that the actual particles in the air are obstructing the viewer's view. And what it does is it creates even more depth. This is a really handy thing to do, especially if you're shooting in smaller places, because it creates so many more microscopic layers of the actual scene. So now I'm gonna incorporate my blocking into the scene and we'll have kind of a complete shot. Basically, that's how you create depth in a scene. It's really not that complicated. It took me all of 10 minutes to set up on this entire thing, and it cost me, I don't know, price of this can? Links down below. Thanks for watching. I hope you like it. I'll catch you next time. Peace.